All right, welcome to the Mission Complete podcast. We just finished up a conversation just now with the one and only Jimi Williams.
We've known Jimmy in different ways and different times.
Yep.
Really cool conversation. Just a couple themes that we noticed were the power of relationships over time. Was one of the big themes I think I took away.
Yeah, and I think we got to kind of hear his story about faith, how to walk in faithfulness and obedience to the Lord, and the doors just all of a sudden the Lord opened, but had been building for years for him.
Yes.
And to hear how he's walking in what he has always been called to and built for. He has a couple of fun encouragements for you guys listening today. So there were a couple moments I was like, oh, he's talking to somebody. I can feel that. You know?
We laughed, we cried.
No.
We didn't cry actually, but
No.
we
Did you?
We laughed and we had a great conversation. So excited for you to hear. And also, if you need merch, let us know.
Yes.
We specialize in screen printing and embroidery. We work with artists, churches, businesses, other nonprofits. We work with a lot of people. So if you need merch, let us know. We'd love to help. We can get it rolling for you.
All right, here's our episode with Jimi Williams.
Boom.
Well, Jimi Williams, thank you for coming on our podcast, the Mission Complete podcast.
The Mission
That's what we're calling
Complete
this.
podcast.
I like that.
Yeah,
We're not
it's good.
stopping until the mission is complete.
Yes. We're excited to have you here.
Thanks.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We know you in different contexts.
I was
kind
driving
of.
down thinking, how long have I known Jimi Williams? A long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. I mean, you were probably maybe late middle school, high school.
Yeah, like I remember when like Andrew Holt led worship for the first time
Yeah.
at Wednesday Night Live.
Yeah.
And but I remember when you and John Labonte would fill in like lead worship from time to time, and it's
Yep.
like Jimmy's in
Man.
Jimmy's in on this
Making
Wednesday.
me feel old, dude.
So but
It's okay.
yeah, so we've been around and connected in a couple different circles of friends now, so
For sure.
it's pretty special.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now I get to lead worship with you every couple weeks or so at church. And I knew about you, but I didn't know you until we started going to church together a few years ago. And
Yeah, it took me a minute to make, and it was your last name
Yeah.
that made the connection
Yeah.
when we first met. And there was something about you. I was like, gosh, that guy just looks familiar to me. And
He just
then-
annoyed you and just
Yeah. And then I was like,
get away.
I saw your last name and I was like, could it be like how many ROBISONs are there
Yeah.
in this area?
Yeah.
You know? And
Yeah.
so I remember texting you, hey, is Michael your brother and Robbie your dad?
Yeah.
And you're like,
I was like,
why are you asking?
I don't want to claim that, but yes, you know. Yeah, it's funny. It's like, 20 years ago you led worship with my brother, and then now we're leading worship together. But then you were at my house. You were telling us earlier that when I was a kid, you were at my house meeting with my mom about homeschooling your boys.
no way.
And I was homeschooled. I didn't know you at the time, but I was there.
I didn't know
know?
you were there.
I was running
Y'all
around as a
running
little
around.
kid, you know, and here we are. So I got my own little kids, and you've been at my
That's
house, and
right.
my little kids are running around. It's kind of weird.
It's sweet.
Yeah.
That's a sweet thing, man.
Yeah.
Thankful for that. The older I get, I'm thankful for that. Like years of relationship.
Yep. It is. And the seasons that go, that you end up going through. It's like 4 years ago, I didn't really know who you were. Today, it's like, we're texting like every other week, like, oh gosh, what key are you going to do the song in, Which is great. It's a lot of fun. There's so much to Jimi Williams, I feel like. And one of the things I wanted to first ask you about is, what is the look? What can you tell us a little bit about? We're going way back.
The
You've been
look.
looking around on us.
I mean, maybe I have. Maybe I did, but
Man.
I just need to know, who is this Jimi Williams? Because I didn't know you, during that time.
No, I was a different man at that time. So I started doing music in high school, and I was big into sports. But like my senior or probably my high school year, starting probably sophomore up, the music bug like bit me big time.
Where'd you grow up? Where were you?
Like East Nashville area.
Okay.
So I was in Middle Tennessee, and I really got into music, and we had a old upright piano at our house that nobody played. I don't even know where it came from, but I started kind of just plucking around on it. My dad played guitar, had an old Gibson
Okay.
guitar that
Yeah.
we as kids just knocked over all the time.
Just
you know?
abused.
It was in terrible shape.
Yeah.
But started grabbing that and like watching. He would pick it up every now and then and play old Hank Williams Jr. stuff or Hank Williams Sr. and
Oh.
sat around the kitchen table, and I would.
You
At
related?
some point, I started like leaning in.
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
What are you doing? And so I was in high school. I was in bands, actually original music band in high school, and we were writing and just, you know,
Just like rock? Like what were you?
just like at the time, this was 1984, 85,
Okay.
so like it was hair metal guys. Like,
Yes.
It was Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, like that's what was happening
Yeah.
at that time.
Awesome.
And so we wanted to be that. But so when I graduated high school, I went to college, MTSU here in Middle Tennessee. But I got there and I'd heard through friends or whatever. The band, of course, when I went to college, that we kind of dispersed and some of the guys moved away and got jobs and stuff like
Sure,
that.
yeah.
So there were these guys that were a couple years older than me, and somehow I met somebody that knew them or whatever. They found out I was a musician and stuff, and they're like, "Hey, we need a bass player, you know, for this band. There's 3 of us,
Yeah.
you know, and we want to start doing just some fraternity parties and stuff like that." And
all
like,
at MTSU, like it
Yeah.
was just based
it
around.
was all guys that
Okay.
they were all like, you know, super smart guys. Like today, they're like, you know, there's one of them that's like incredibly wealthy, which is really fun.
Yeah.
But so the band was called The Look, and so I joined up with them, and we were, you know, musically marginally talented, but great guys and fun guys. And so we got booked all over the place to do
That's hilarious.
Wow.
fraternity parties, sorority formals, like
Yeah.
wedding stuff.
That's
you know,
awesome.
And pretty much like I had some summer jobs in college, but I pretty much the rest of the time, because I had to work all the way through college. So we would gig on the weekends, you know, and make
that's
$100 or
great.
make $150.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just enough money to like get through the week
Yeah.
with just like extra expenses and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
of course it was a lot of fun, and it was
Oh, yeah.
super. Those guys were like way more mature than I was, and so yeah, they took care of everything, and like we just showed up and played, and it was really good. I mean, just learned. I learned a ton, and just playing that much. I mean, our set was, you know, looking back now, it was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
We would do 3 sets of 15 songs.
Wow.
And that was the party set, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Because you're there for hours.
yeah, because
Yeah.
we would start at,
Yeah.
you
That's
know,
so much.
we'd start at 8:30 or 9, and we'd go till, you know, 1 in the morning or something like that. And
Did you have like a book of songs that the party planner would choose from, or did you just
no,
play?
we just played our set.
Just played
Okay.
everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I played. One of the cool things at that time was, you know, I think that's where I developed like a good ear for music. So I never used charts or anything like that. I just
That's
Wow.
awesome.
just learned the songs. And so we did that for like a couple of years, and then all those guys graduated and got real jobs.
Yeah.
You know, one was an accountant, one was in insurance, one guy was in business, and when that ended, so I'm sitting there at MTSU, and I was going into my junior year, and I'm like, dang, it's like the band's over. You know?
Yeah.
And then I was like, I'd still, you know, we'd still friends with like all the guys that I played with in high school. We're still friends.
Oh, okay.
And I just like, I called them, and this was before cell phones or anything like that. But I got a hold of his one of.
Payphones.
There was a lot of that.
Yeah.
found the number where like went to the mom of one of the guys. I still had his home number, and they had moved to Boston, and they were working in Boston, they were working cleaning up waste on the riverbank in Boston.
Bro.
When
Oh,
I
man.
called them, and I was like, "Hey guys," there was 2 of the guys in the band were up there, and I was like, "What do y'all like? Would you consider like moving, you know, down?" And like I said, I've got this booking agent that I already know, and I've got contacts and stuff.
Yeah.
And like, would you guys want to restart like a band and do parties and fraternity parties, stuff like that? They're like, we're leaving tomorrow.
Who was the booking agent?
It was an agency in Nashville called Crescent Moon Talent,
Okay.
and we got connected up with them, and they were great. I mean, they had a circuit. They knew every college in the South,
That's
and
crazy.
they just booked us
crazy.
all over the
Yeah.
place. And
Wow.
so we went to like every SEC university, went to a lot of other smaller universities. And it was nuts at times, just crazy stuff, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then at times it was like super cool, there's some good experiences. But those guys came back down. We found a guy who was a musician at MTSU, was a great front man. And so The Look was the first band. Domestic Jeffrey was the second band.
What?
I am definitely going back to look these up after
name-
this.
and I don't even know.
Please tell me how you
I don't
came up
even
with Domestic
remember,
Jeffrey.
bro. I don't even remember where the name. It's one of the guys. Like
Was it with a J or was it G?
Joffrey.
it was G like Toys R Us Jeffrey.
Okay.
Oh man.
Even
Did you
worse.
have a logo that was a giraffe, like a.
No, it
Okay.
was just a script
copyright.
logo, and there's some photos out there somewhere.
I would like to see the domestic.
I will
Jeffrey one.
scrub the internet for this.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I had a great
I
like
mean-
curly mullet going on. It
But
was
that was, I mean,
at the time.
everyone had
It
that.
was hot.
Yeah.
At the time.
Now the curly, that's coming
It's
back.
coming back. If
It's
you're a
not just the
baseball
mullet.
player,
Yeah, exactly.
you are almost required.
Yeah.
It's like the duck camo hat with
Yes.
the poof.
Yes.
You gotta
Yeah.
have that.
Like
Yeah.
one of our neighbors upstairs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a guy
true.
upstairs to a T.
There was a high schooler at the gym yesterday, and I was like, I see you're growing it up. You just
Yep.
want to look cool.
Yep.
When I was in high school, I lamented constantly because, like, all the cool bands, the guys had like this straight kind of like big hair and stuff
Thin.
like that.
Yeah.
And mine would never do that because I had curly hair.
Uh-huh.
So the longer it got, it just got bigger.
Yeah.
Kind of like it never got into a fro, but it was like it just got bigger and
full.
more
Yeah.
curly
Yeah.
And just out of control.
and I just lamented it as like I couldn't have the hair that I wanted to have.
Yeah.
Okay, did you play bass in Domestic Jeffrey,
did.
or did you change instruments?
Yeah, no, I played
Okay.
bass in that band as well. So
Okay.
for 4 years I played, and I never played bass.
Before that?
I played a little bit in high school, but mainly I was a guitar player.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
That's what I know you as. I didn't know you played bass previously, so
and I really grew like a real appreciation and a love for bass. Like somebody would be
Sure.
like, "Oh, it's a boring instrument." Like, no, it's like there's so much there.
yep.
So, but I played bass all the way through. And then
That's
when
so
we
funny.
people started to graduate, and the thing, we had a typical rock band moment where we had to like fire our lead singer. he was just too full of
Oh.
himself,
Yeah.
and wouldn't show up.
I work with a guy like that. It's tough. Yeah, I can empathize.
Who is that?
We'll talk later. So
Okay, great.
yeah.
Yeah, so we had to go through the whole typical just how messy, it was like you're out of the band.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Gosh.
You're not a real band if you haven't had to do that.
That's right.
You know
and
what I
then
mean?
he started another band with competing with our band. This is like Van Halen all over again.
It's like Michael Scott. I'll just start another one. I'll
Yeah.
just I'll get kicked out and then I'll just start another one.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
So pretty much
That's
wrapped
funny.
up. When we got out of college, we did a few things, but we did some reunion gigs, which was
Okay.
like, this is where the 3 sets of 15 songs like really hit you in the face. Is like, we did, I guess it's been about 5 years ago, we did a Look reunion. And those guys, I mean, I'm 56 now, so those guys are 58.
Sure.
So when we did that reunion, I mean, they were in their 50s and none of them played music regularly. Like I was still involved with the church all the time. So I was
sure.
still playing
Yeah.
music, singing all the time.
Yeah.
These guys literally, like, they would just jam at home, but weren't playing out, weren't
Yeah.
doing anything.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden
I
it's like,
cannot
hey
imagine.
guys, you want to do a reunion gig? We had this corporate thing and somebody called and said, hey, would you guys come and do it?
Like a
we're-
nostalgic thing, like they
Yeah.
saw you in college and they
Wow.
It was either somebody we knew, some of them were somebody
Wow.
we knew, and some of it times it was just like somebody had
said,
a work
"That's really
contact.
fun." Yeah.
And we did like, that band was all like, everything from the Rolling Stones, Beatles through, like The Cure. And so it was just like,
Yeah.
it was a wide,
Yeah.
it was mainly 60s, 70s, early 80s type of music.
Okay.
Okay.
But that first reunion gig we did, and we started looking at the set list and rehearsing, I was like, how am I going to learn? Because, I hadn't played these songs
Yeah.
in 30 years. Like, how am I
Yeah.
going to learn 45 songs?
In 2 weeks.
and I remember it was funny. Then one of the lead singer,
Wow.
playing's a lot. Singing 45
I was gonna say,
songs.
if he had not been singing like the last 20 years,
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
I mean, we
You know
got
what I
it.
mean?
We got about 3 songs into the third set the night we played, and he just turned around in the band and goes, "Guys, I'm done."
Yeah.
I was like,
Oh, yeah.
Well, you mean like right now you're done?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm done."
Did one of you have to like step up and?
No, we were just like, we just told everybody, "Thanks for coming out."
We're old now.
We're in our mid 50s,
Yeah,
guys.
right.
We've hit the capacity.
my
of
bedtime.
what we can do.
That's hilarious. I mean, I feel like singing, if I haven't sang in like a month to like lead worship once, I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
Can't imagine.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Which is,
Golly.
it's funny now in church, like you work with young musicians, young singers, and they'll come in, they'll be like, they'll be like,
Yeah.
it's like trying to
Yeah.
warm up. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, my voice is hurt. I was like, how many songs do you lead a day? One.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
I'm like,
Yeah.
Just take a back
Feel a
seat.
little scratch.
yeah, it's like, why don't you just
Yeah.
toughen up? Come
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
You have no idea.
Yep.
So you were in Domestic Jeffries for how long?
It was, that band was about 2 years, maybe a little over 2 years.
Okay.
2 and 2,
and
right?
2, yeah.
The look, domestic Jeffries, and you
Yeah.
graduated.
And then we had to get jobs.
Oh.
Yeah.
Actually graduated into life.
Okay.
But it was
that's
awesome.
sad.
Like it was a great part-time job and much more fun
Oh,
than working in
yeah,
a grocery
totally.
store and like
For sure.
stuff like that. And
Well, and the skill set that you were able to take, obviously you continued to play in
Yeah.
different contexts, but I think that's an amazing thing. You're working on a skill and having fun.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, and getting paid for it.
And getting paid for it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, what'd you do after college?
Well, I graduated in music business.
Oh, that was your
from MTSU.
degree, okay.
And in the music business at MTSU at the time was kind of a joke, honestly,
Sure.
in a lot of ways. It wasn't nearly as developed as it is now. I mean,
Yeah,
they've got
it's pretty big.
It's pretty stout
world-class,
now, yeah.
And there's major studios they've built.
Yep.
But at the time, I mean, there was some good stuff. I had a business minor, so I learned. I actually got more out of the business minor than probably the music
Sure.
industry major. But when I graduated, country music. This was '89. I graduated. Country music was in a weird spot. Nashville wasn't booming the way it is now,
Yep.
and a lot of the labels and publishers, they just, there wasn't a lot of hiring going on. And if you wanted to get in, you just had to know somebody. That was the only way you could get a job.
Yeah.
And I did an intern in country music, and I loved country music. Wanted to work in that industry.
Wow.
And interned for a while with a publisher there. But when I graduated, there was just nothing. There was no jobs. you
Yeah.
know, And so I ended up going to work for a record store. One of my professors in college was actually a regional manager district manager for a record store at the time.
Okay.
So I did retail record store for a couple of years.
Okay.
A company called Sound Shop Records, and it was cool. It was typical retail, but
It's still music. Like
it
you're
was
still
music.
around.
Yeah. I mean, we at that time the industry was in a whole different place. And
Yeah.
I remember they still did these trips where they would bring the entire management staff of all the record stores to some exotic location.
What?
And all of the labels would fund it and come
What?
in and present all of their new
Wow.
material.
Wow.
So we went to
Wow.
Grand Cayman one year. They flew us all to Grand Cayman.
Sheesh.
And-
Because you worked at a record
Yeah.
store?
And so during the
I am in the wrong industry, guys.
and during the day, like
You got to make a couple phone calls.
like Warner Brothers, RCA, like I would all come in and they
That's
would
awesome.
play all of their music, and sometimes an artist would show up.
That's
and
awesome.
give
Yeah.
you like a little behind the scenes into their music. It was
Yeah.
amazing. I look at it
Wow.
now, I was like, gosh, labels don't have that kind of,
Yep.
I mean, they would never spend money on that today.
Yeah.
Sure.
But but back then, that's the way it worked. And so I did that for a couple of years, and then it had taken me out of Nashville. I was in Kentucky for a while, and then Tuscaloosa, Alabama for a while, just with different stores.
Okay.
Jennifer and I got married during that time, and we just missed Middle Tennessee. All of our family was here, and so there wasn't an opportunity with the record store, and I was kind of needed to go somewhere else. It was just, there was no growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I ended up moving. The only job I could find back in Nashville, though, was electronics store management, because I had music business, but nobody was hiring music. So
Right.
I had retail experience and management experience, so I got hired at that, and so managed Electronic Express for 2 years,
Okay.
and it was crazy. It's owned by these a couple of like Jewish Iranian guys, and they were so
Like,
funny.
just started a joke.
I know.
Hold
Two
on.
Jewish Iranian guys walk into a bar.
They were so funny, and it was so at the time. I mean, it's much better now, but at the time, it was so sketchy. Like I don't know half the
Wow.
time, like where they got their inventory from, or whatever. But
Oh man.
Probably
I did that for a
imported
couple
it.
of years, and then it was just.
Where was that? Like where in Nashville were you?
I was in Hickory Hollow Mall,
Oh, okay.
Antioch, when it
But
was.
that's
a mall.
when it was. Yeah.
Wow.
There was a lot going on at that
Yeah.
point.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, and so I did
Okay.
that, and then during that time, Jennifer and I, we had grown up in church, both of us, but we had been out of church kind of during college, and then when we got married, we kind of started to go back, but we didn't really know where we wanted to go.
Sure.
We were both extremely like left liberal minded. We just just through college and had a lot of ideas, but we started going back to church, and the retail thing was it was frustrating, and so I remember one day I just got frustrated with it and I just quit. There was
Wow.
had
Wow.
nothing lined up, and
Can I do that?
Please, yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it.
By all means.
I do have to feed my children, I guess. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And Jennifer was working, so it wasn't like a complete shock. But I quit, and,
Sure.
and Jennifer actually was, back then you found jobs through, like want ads and newspapers.
Yeah,
and stuff like that.
newspapers,
This was
yeah.
still pre-online. So I saw a record company named Brentwood Music that was hiring sales. Again, it's like, gosh, I just want to get away from the sales thing. And so I applied for it, got the job, and it was telephone sales. Like it was a Christian music company, but they didn't have any like artist projects. It was all like instrumental, like they sell Smoky Mountain music, which was this instrumental like acoustic music, and they would sell it in bookstores, Christian bookstores,
Yeah.
gift bookstores.
Yeah.
It was all telephone sales at the time. It was all CDs and cassettes. It was a weird time in Christian music anyway at the time, but
Was this early 90s at this
yeah,
point?
this would have been probably 1994.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sure.
and there was just a lot. Christian music was in a weird spot. There was a lot of like scandalous stuff that had gone on.
Mm.
The industry was starting to get bought up by mainstream companies, and which at the time, I mean, it's that way now too, but at the time, it really, I think, it jacked with the identity of the industry and
Yep.
the practices, and but it was a weird time. But I did that for a couple of years. I worked really hard at it, but then I had an opportunity to move out of that into copyright and licensing on the publishing side.
Okay.
And that was more in line with like, okay, at least I went to school for this.
Yeah,
I
the
feel like I'm
business
fine.
side.
But I tell people, like, if you're, young people that are coming out of college and things like that, is like, don't get frustrated if you don't land
Yeah.
the dream job.
Totally.
Yep.
The first couple of years out.
Yeah.
I mean, it took me 6 years to even get into the music industry.
Sure.
And that still wasn't the job ultimately that I felt like I needed.
Sure.
I wanted to land at.
Yeah.
I just finally got my foot into the door,
Yeah.
into a little bit in the trajectory I wanted to go. It took 6 years. It took another, 6 years to actually get into the role where I felt like, okay, this is kind of what I dreamed about when I was in
Yeah.
college.
Yeah.
So that was my first thing. Along the way, I was like, I loved country music. I was songwriting. I did about 2 years where like I was working with this guy in Nashville who knew some people, but he wasn't like completely legit. And I was just writing, doing all these just writing room stuff with people who were like me, just trying to bust in. It wasn't
Yeah.
anybody that already had any success. We
Yeah.
were all just on the outside trying to like get into the writing circle. And I did that for a couple of years. And I remember though at the end of that, when I finally figured out, like the day I was like, you know what, this just isn't gonna happen.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
it was a little bit of a death of a dream,
Mm.
for me at the time.
Yeah, I get that.
It was the best thing that could have happened looking back. I think if I'd have gotten what I wanted, it probably would have destroyed my life, and so it was for sure God sovereignly closing a door.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I know you want that really bad.
Yeah.
It's not the best thing for you.
Like the Bible says, ask, seek, and knock. But I've been in seasons where I'm past the knocking and I'm like banging on the door.
Yeah.
And so I totally resonate with that.
Yeah. And that's where I was. I felt like I was pushing really hard and nothing was opening up.
Yeah.
And finally came to the realization that it's like, you know what, this isn't maybe what I'm really supposed to be doing.
Yep.
And so we had gotten back into church. When I got back into church, it was a little small Nazarene church, literally like 40 people.
Wow.
And
So pretty huge.
Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah.
About average for American churches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were like, found out I did music stuff. Like, really? Like, like we need help, with music. And they had a piano and a bass player and this little choir, and they sang pretty much all hymns.
Yeah.
And so they were like, would you help us? And I was like, I'll try.
You're beyond my help. Thank
I'd
you.
never done any church music before. I mean, I'd done cover band in college.
Yeah.
This is way different. And so I started helping out with this little church, and it was really sweet. I mean, it was we were there for a couple of years, but I think it put something in my heart, definitely on a trajectory.
Yep.
And Christian, our oldest son, was born, and we moved over to a larger church just so that there would be, that church didn't even have like a nursery, anything. They just weren't big enough. So moved over, and shortly after there, a bunch of guys took a trip to Memphis to a Promise Keepers rally.
Oh,
It was like one of the first ones.
Yes.
This was probably 97 maybe, somewhere around there. It was at the Liberty Bowl. And I remember going, and I'd never even been to a Christian concert ever.
What?
I was
That's
starting to
so
listen to some, but just working at Pro in Music, I was finally starting to discover, I remember I discovered Rich Mullins' catalog.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this guy's he's a songwriter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And so I was kind of starting to discover Christian music. I was enjoying it, Stephen Curtis Chapman, things like that. But I went to this Promise Keepers rally
Yeah.
and never experienced anything like that. I mean, it was like 80,000 guys in the round in the Liberty
Wow.
Bowl. Maranatha Praise Band, multicultural, full band, all these expressions, hymns, but all these new songs that were being birthed out of California. And I remember I just came back from that. And I was like, I don't know what that was, but that's what I want.
I want more of it.
I want to be a part of that somehow, some way. And so I came back, and we ended up starting a little praise team, because the church we were in was very choir, It was not modern at all. And I remember starting a little band that was separate from that. We didn't do anything in church, but we did some things at night and stuff like that. And that was kind of my first taste of being just in a worship band or a team. And
you started that.
Yeah.
You're like, okay.
yeah, I
I'm
went to a
coming out
couple of the
Promise
guys
Keepers
at the church who were also kind of just musicians like that.
Yeah.
And it was like, hey, you guys want to do something?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you feel like this conference was like the seed that was planted, where you said, you started leading worship at this Nazarene church and it changed the trajectory, but maybe the conference changed the trajectory even more.
Sure. Yeah, just exposed to something I'd never.
Sure.
I had two really significant events like that marked me. One was Promise Keepers. The other was in '99. I went to a Worship Together conference, and it was at a church in Franklin, the People's Church, where you grew up.
Yep.
And they had all these leaders from the UK that had come over for it. It was so outside of, again, didn't know any of these people existed. It was early on, but it was, Redmond was there, Brad Dirksen, and some of the Vineyard folks were there.
Yeah.
This guy named Ian White, who was a Scottish guy, was there. And it was just unbelievable. It was the first time that I, in the room, experienced Tehillah praise, in the room. And I remember walking away from that, just blown away of okay, God, you just opened my eyes to what you're doing, and Sonic Flow was a big part of that, Jeff Dio. And so these experiences like that, I try to think about that, because sometimes I get, conferences, you kind of get in, when you start leading them yourself or being a part of that, you think it's well, I was doing this, but for somebody sitting out there, these conferences are going to change their world.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
and it did for me. But it really just sparked a passion in me. And this was about the time that I'd started helping out a little bit at church, leading worship with the youth when you were there, Andy, and and with Michael, and and just rawness, like going for God, you know. And it was a really, really sweet time. And the worship industry at that time was just, it was all new, you know, like Delirious was just like blowing everybody's minds, cutting edge had come out, and there was just like this whole new wave of like modern worship. There was even a progression. Maranatha was amazing, but this was like another level. This was like rock band, modern music that was like incorporating like all of these really spiritual lyrics, and worship was going, and all these young people were just like coming and being a part of it, and they were doing these huge events everywhere and rallies. And it was just really a super special time in the music side of things. And so I'm working the whole time, you know, I'd done copyright and things like that. Yeah. So at the time, you know, Berwyn Music eventually was bought by a mainstream company. They bought Reunion Records, Benson Records, and created Provident Music Group. So I was there during all that transition of that. And so at that point, then you had Provident Music Group. You still had Word that had been bought by Warner. And then you had EMI Christian Music that had been bought by EMI. Eventually got bought by Universal, which is their own by today. But it was a lot of transition in that whole period. But I was there doing that. And then was leading worship for youth, and we had the opportunity to go and plant a church. There was a really well-known personality in Middle Tennessee who was planting a church, and he asked me to come along and be the worship leader for this new plant. I mean, it was like a big deal. I mean, we had like well-known like people in the first home meeting where we were talking about planting the church. There was like all these people that were like, "Oh my gosh, like you're a hero." I was like, what is this? This is amazing, you know? And literally, like, we got like 2 months into the plant process, and the well-known guy that was planting the church was like, guys, I don't think I'm cut out for this, you know? He had never pastored before. He had other ministry outlets, and so we're like, oh wow, we'd already told our church that we were going to plant, we were leaving, and so my buddy Steve at the time he was going to be the youth pastor. We just got to look at each other and be like, well, like, what do we do now?
Yeah.
You know, he's like, well, let's pray. Like, is God wanting us just to start a church together? You know? And so we prayed and felt like that was, that's what we need to do. And so we planted a church down here in Columbia during that time.
I didn't know that.
And
That's where it came from. That's fascinating.
Yeah. And so I was bivocational at the time, so I was working during the day and then doing worship stuff as much as I could on the side. I mean, I was praying really, like, I was just like, God, just let me just transition to ministry, and where I can focus all my energy there. My heart was all there. And so after the church had been running for a year, 18 months, I was finally able to begin to transition over. But it was one of those transitions where it's like, hey, the church can pay you $500 a month.
Yeah.
Can you go and try to raise like your other support? And so we did that for a season, which was really humbling. And, you know, we had some friends and a few family members that helped us out during that transition. And God was just so faithful. I mean, we had zero, looking back, it was shocking how little money we had.
Yeah.
And no insurance because we couldn't get health insurance. Like, we were on this separate Christian, like, health expense sharing program. But anyway, it was just God was faithful. Like, we would get a call from a friend, one of our neighbors or whatever, and he'd be like, hey, God put you on my heart. Meet me at the back fence. And he'd hand us like a $300 check, you know?
Wow.
And it was just such a sweet time. With what the Lord was doing, and he was growing us, stretching us. Yeah. And that was about a 3-year stint. And eventually the pastor ended up going back into youth ministry, and I transitioned back into the music business at that point. And it was a hard church plant. If anybody out there is like ever planted a church, I mean, you know, I mean, it's not a work for the faint-hearted.
Not at all. Yep.
And we didn't have a big support system either, which made it even harder. So, you know, it was a lot of work, and we were pretty exhausted at the end of 3 years, honestly. And so went back into the music business, this time with EMI. So I had a buddy who was working for them, was in my neighborhood. He's like, hey, we're looking for somebody to like run our admin department. And I was like, well, I've got experience doing that. So I got that job there, and so went to work for, which was then EMI Christian Music, for a couple of years. Was still heavily involved with worship. We had transitioned back to our original church and was just helping out, leading however we could.
Sure.
You know, and I did that job for a couple of years, and then the church wanted me to come on full time to actually start a new service for them. They were starting a separate, more contemporary service. And I was so excited because I was like, man, this is like great, like steady paycheck.
Was that the new building at Thompson Station?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's when they launched that separate
Yeah, I remember.
venue up there.
Uh-huh.
And it was funny at the time. I remember thinking like, okay, Lord, like this is finally like the path that
This is the ministry
that I wanted to be
for.
on.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking that, and which was so shocking because I got a year into that role, and then I got a call from Eddie DeGarmo at EMI, and Eddie's like, hey, the person running Worship Together has left. Would you come back and run this for us? And I was like, Eddie, I just left. I said, I just came on here. And
Yeah.
I feel like this is like, you know, like really, like this is where I wanted to be long term. And
Right.
he's like, well, just pray about it. I was like, all right.
Yeah.
And it was surprising. Like I prayed about it with Jennifer, and then I went and talked to like the church leaders. I just laid it out. I was like, hey, here's the opportunity. You know, I was like, and I even told them, I was like, I don't really feel like I'm supposed to take this, but
Yeah.
I told them I would pray for it, and I value your wisdom and your input. And both my direct boss and the executive pastor of the church said, you would be foolish not to take this.
Wow.
This is who you are.
Wow. That's
And I was
pretty
shocked.
selfless.
Yeah, I was shocked at the time and a little thrown off because I was thinking, like this, you know, this role I was in at the church was supposed to be, you know, this was 5 years at least.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember going home, and Jennifer was like, well, what did they say? And I was like, they told me I should take the job. And she's like, what? And I was like, yeah. And so,
Was it confirming it all to you? Like, was there something in you that was like,
I mean, there was a
Okay,
piece of me that resonated with it because of those earlier Worship Together events. Like Worship Together had
Right.
had such an impact
Right.
on me personally that when they called, there was a piece of me that came alive for sure.
Sure,
Of like,
yeah.
wow, this thing that really has impacted me.
Right.
You know, to be able to go in and lead that for other people, that is special, you know. And so, you know, once I came to sort of made peace with like, okay, you know, maybe this is, you know, what God wants. And so I went back into that role, and that was like a 15-year run.
wow.
And so,
Wow.
and the interesting thing,
Yeah.
I mean, at the time, it's like I never gave up or stopped like the worship ministry side of what I did.
Sure.
Which, looking back, like, you know, it helps me even as I talk to like young artists, people like that are trying to build a career in it.
Yep.
You know, like the local church side it's just always there.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I was working full time and
Yeah.
I had this role that was awesome, and I got to work with a lot of people and my heroes and things like that. But I was still such a local church guy that, you know, I still was super committed there. I was still involved
Yeah.
with youth, or involved with Sunday morning and
Right.
helping lead worship. And it just was funny. It's just never a question of whether or not I was
Yeah.
going to do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
You know,
You never outgrew that.
I didn't.
You know? Yeah.
And so the stint at EMI eventually became Capital, but that whole 15 years was just amazing. It was incredible. I mean, looking back now, it was just a gift, and you know, I got to work with a ton of my heroes, and
Yeah.
and just see amazing things happen, be a part of songs that went around the world, and
Right.
it was an amazing time and a really good time. I mean, it was a really special time, and you know, and it was probably coming out of COVID, you know, 2020, you know, that for the first time that since I'd been there, started thinking like, well, it's like, man, this is for the first time, like I don't see 5 years ahead of like me doing the same
Yeah.
thing.
Just
I'm doing
sensed
now.
like a season change.
Yeah. and it was a transition period, you know. And so again, for anybody that's listening that feels like they're in a season of unsettling, I mean, it's not a fun place to be.
Right.
It's like I feel like something's shifting, something's going to change, but I don't know what it is yet, and there's
Right.
really nothing I can do
Right.
to make
Right.
that happen.
Yep.
You know, because of my role at Capitol, I couldn't just like
Put
my name out there.
Oh yeah.
Well, I couldn't just put my
yeah,
name out
yeah.
there and it's like,
Right.
hey, I don't know what it is supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be doing something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't have been cool. And
That would have put so many other people in an unsettling space.
Yes.
Yeah.
It
which
would
is
have,
not
right.
good leadership.
right.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like, yeah, I couldn't just like turn in 2 weeks and be like, hey, I'm gonna. Though it did occur to me at some point, I got so frustrated with it after a while that the thought was coming. You know, it was like, well, maybe I just need to resign because I'm never going to be able to see where this is going until
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm actually able to talk with people, share what I'm feeling
Yeah.
inside. And, you know, and I hadn't told anybody, you know, really what I was feeling. I had a couple of, you know, other than a couple of people at church that were praying with us, and then my best friend that was there at Capitol. Just,
Yeah.
and I wasn't really sharing. I shared a little bit with my boss there because he was a really great guy. Of just the feeling of like, not sure what this season is,
Sure.
or where I need to go. But so we prayed, you know, probably for almost a year. I remember, you know, February 22, I was down in Dallas on a work trip. I was at Upper Room down there, and we were doing some video stuff on Monday, but I went down early because I wanted to go to church. And so I went down to Sunday night church, and I had this really interesting experience. I was just worshiping, sitting there at church, and this, you know, partway through the service, this guy walks over. I'd never seen him before. He walks over and he said, I don't know who you are. He said, but he said, I saw when I looked over at you, I saw you. And he said, I saw an open heaven over you.
Mm.
So he said, I was like, I don't know what that means.
You're going to have to elaborate a little bit.
And he said, whatever you want from the Lord, ask for it.
Mm.
And he just walked away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, what? And so I remember leaving there that night. I called my wife and told her what happened. I was like, I don't know what this means. I said, but I feel like I need to figure this out. I need to press into the Lord.
Yep.
So I got up the next morning. I had some time the next morning. I got up. They do prayer. Their prayer room is open pretty much 5 days a week, 6 days a week. So I got up and went over to their prayer room the next day and spent some time in there. And it was just calling out to the Lord. It's like, man, what is this? Like,
Yeah.
I feel this unsettledness. Here's this guy that's telling me, like, ask
Yeah.
for whatever you want. I
Yeah.
don't even know what to ask for. Like, I don't know what I want.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there in the prayer room, and it was just such a sweet time. You know, it was just, you know, someone was leading worship, and, you know, it was very spontaneous and prophetic. And I remember one point I was just sitting there, and I just said, God, I want this.
Mm.
This is what I want. And I felt like the Lord just was real clear to me there and said, go back and start this at your church. And I was like, what? Like, I'm trying to figure out how to, like,
Change
transition
careers,
and, like,
yeah.
change careers and stuff
Yeah.
like that. I was like, it's like, no, just go back and start this at your church. And so I came home and told Jennifer. She's like, what? And I remember going to our pastor and our worship pastor, and I was like, I had this crazy experience. And it's like, I just feel like I'm supposed to start a prayer room at the church. And they were both just like immediately in, like they were like 100%, like, this is where we are as a church. We need this. Like, what do you need from us to start it? And so that was February 22. We started the prayer room in our church. We were meeting there. Brian, you were part of that, just helping lead worship in there, and it was such a powerful time. But I still didn't know what I was headed career-wise.
Yeah.
So Jennifer and I were both going and just pouring into that, seeking the Lord. God was showing me so many things just about prayer and about the power of that, and teaching me. And I remember we got into the summer of that year, the 22, and worshiped together. We were doing a conference here in town, in Nashville, and I was there, and I was just feeling a major of this, like, God, I've had to really figure out where I'm going, you know, because I felt the door shutting on Capitol, but I didn't know where it was opening up.
Yeah.
It was really beginning to affect me.
Yeah.
And I remember grabbing Andrew Holt, who's the worship pastor of the building. I grabbed Andrew. I was like, bro, I was like, just pray over me. And I was like, I don't know what this feeling is. I just feel like there's something else coming, and I don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So but I got to know what it is. And so he prayed the sweetest prayer, laid hands on me, and I left there. And the next week we were in the prayer room at church, and I told Jennifer the night before, I said, hey, just pray specifically this week, like, again, whatever this is, that God would show us, like, what we're supposed to be doing. So we were in the prayer room on a Wednesday. The next day, I got a call from Skylar Smith, who's Kim's husband, and Skylar's like, hey, like, Jesus Culture needs someone to lead their music, commercial music, the label. And he said, your name is at the top of the list. Would you consider? He said, I know it's just like, and no, because nobody knew.
Sure.
I think that was part of the problem is I'd been with Worship Together so long that was my identity.
Yeah.
Everybody was like,
Right.
Jimmy would never leave that. I mean,
They just attached worship
like,
together with Jimmy. It's like they just go hand in
I was
hand.
so attached. I'd done so many like videos and like things with them, and so when Skylar reached out, I was like,
What a bold move,
yeah.
you know, for him to be like, I would love to hear from his perspective. What was the lead up?
When he
You know what I mean?
he and Kim were the only ones, they're the ones that threw my hat in the ring, because I knew I'd worked with Jesus Culture on the song side for a number of years, and I knew all the people there and the artists, and I knew Banning, but I didn't know their team.
Right.
And so it's a very relational organization. Most of the people that work with Jesus Culture, they've been in a relationship for 10 to 15 years.
Sure.
And so having someone come in from the outside, especially someone from Nashville, which they viewed as even more of an outsider, like, we don't want you coming in telling us what to do.
Yeah.
It was, I remember the first conversation with Banning was, it's like, you seem like a nice guy. He said, but I don't know you. And he goes, and I've just never put anybody into this level of a position without knowing them and walking with them for 10 years.
Right.
And I was like, I get it, man.
Yeah.
I was like, honestly, I don't know you guys either. I said, but I told him the story, you know, of the prayer. I told him the story of the word that was spoken over me, and I told him about the prayer room. And want you to know, this is the crazy thing, is at the end of the day, the reason Jesus Culture hired me to come on was not because of my 25 years of music industry experience. It wasn't because of the Worship Together experience. I mean, all that had a part of it. The reason they felt comfortable offering me the job was because of the prayer room.
Really?
Wow.
Isn't that weird?
No way.
That's the reason. It was the one. It was a
That
ministry
is
connecting
awesome.
point
Wow.
that resonated so loudly with them, because God was doing a work in their local churches around prayer as well. And so when I shared my testimony and like what we had done in the prayer room, you just saw them like they lit up.
Wow.
And
It's more about who you were instead of your resume. And
exactly.
Yeah.
It was the link that they needed to feel comfortable.
Wow.
Yeah.
Of bringing me on. And so I did due diligence. Like, I called everybody I knew that worked with them. I was friends with their attorney that had been on their board. So I called him. I was like, it's like, tell me what's going on. You know where the bodies are buried.
Yeah.
What am I walking into here? And the consensus was like, what you have, both from the industry background and from the church background, they need that, because they don't need somebody to come in from the industry to tell them how to make records.
Right.
They need somebody who has a heart for the church that can help them do this in a way that will make teams healthy locally, that will actually build this around the mission of what the church is, instead of just coming in with an agenda from Nashville.
Right.
More about keeping it on the rails,
Absolutely.
connected to the church, instead of letting it get
Health, relationship, honest conversations, all of that. So I felt, based on everything I'd been through and just like all the affirmations, there was no doubt. I was 100%. I was like, this is God. Even before I think they were convinced, I was like, this is the Lord.
Yeah.
And so we transitioned. I transitioned the fall of 22. It was such an easy transition from Capital, because Jesus Culture works with Capital. And so I literally work with a lot of the same people I used to. I just flipped and sat on the other side of the table.
That's awesome. I love that though.
And it was good
That's
for
cool.
them,
Yeah.
especially I think the transition felt right. Because I never felt the transition was to go to another industry job, like to another
Yeah,
label.
like
Yeah.
It's like, man, it's like I feel like I'm working for the best team in Nashville.
Yeah.
Like this doesn't make sense to go and
Yeah.
just work somewhere else. That wouldn't have scratched whatever itch there was
Sure.
there. So, God brought the one thing that there was probably only 2 or 3 jobs that would have hit all the points that I needed them
Yep.
to hit.
Mhm.
And being
Yep.
able to use the industry background and the experience, but also the ministry piece of it, like
Right.
connecting church, and
Yep.
doing it in a way that's like healthy and there's a purity to it.
Yep.
All of those things. And, there was only maybe 2 or 3 jobs that actually would work. And honestly, JC wasn't even on my radar because I didn't know what was going on there.
Yeah.
COVID was really hard on them, and they had to move around because they were in a school, and at the time it was like, man, it's like feels like it's all kind of like in flux. So, but the way that it worked out was like, looking back, it's like, man, guys, like you're so much more creative than I ever could
Totally.
be to
Yeah.
like
Totally.
weave all of these things together to get me to this one place
Yeah.
of where I needed to be. And so, yeah, man. And so I've been with them for about 1.5 years now.
Wow.
Yes.
I'm just like connecting the dots, like different themes, and just like faith is like such an adventure, and like you feeling like, what's this like next thing? I'm feeling unsettled and like have no clue, and like all it takes is like one phone call, and like I don't know, and just like the fear of maybe the unknown, and the like leaving Capital,
Yeah.
and then kind of what you're running and doing now. So
Yeah.
it's pretty cool to like see from this side of it, I think, like, and I think the power of like decades,
Yeah.
even like sitting at this table, it's like, I mean, there's decades,
Yeah.
and then decades with other relationships, and it's just cool to see
Yeah.
how God's weaving the story together.
Yeah.
Yeah. The long-term investment in things, it's like I see that more probably now than ever of like how valuable that is. We tend to bounce around so much
Yeah.
today and like we'll touch something for 3 months and we're off to something else.
Right.
But to really invest in something for long-term is really, it's a high value. And there was a lot of fear like transitioning. I mean, I had a lot of security at Capital.
Right.
Capital has a lot of prestige to it, and things
Sure.
like that. And so it was definitely some fear of like stepping out of that. Is this going to work out or whatever? But it's been such a blessing. One of the things that's been amazing with it is that, Jesus Culture, because they're a church first, and so they're not just a church locally for themselves, but they're a church with a very much an apostolic calling to help other churches.
Yeah.
And Banning is, I don't think I've ever been around a leader has that strong of a calling on his life. He cares so much about other churches. He's mentoring pastors like all over the place. And so when I talk about doing things like this or going, hey, I'm going to go here and speak to this group, whereas before with Capital, it's like, well, could you do it like a business kind of like scenario, like why this has been, you had to justify the trip.
Yeah.
This?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And present this. Jesus Culture is like, it's never a question. It's like, go do it.
Wow.
Go do it. Because they are wired to enable the church, help the church. And so whenever any of their staff has the opportunity to go, even if it brings no value at all to Jesus Culture, they're like, go do that.
Yeah.
If they need you there, if you can encourage somebody, if you can help them, then take the time and go do it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so it's that environment has been amazing because I felt like at this stage of life, also just had, I had things that I wanted to share with people and
Right.
encourage people in.
Yeah.
And that weren't necessarily business practices,
Yeah.
It's like I wanted to challenge people. I wanted to challenge, young creatives and people who were wanting to be artists and be writers and really and speak into that. And
Yeah.
so this has allowed me to have more of that opportunity to go and do those things
Yep.
Yeah.
and to really be able to share in a way that I had to be really careful, because at Capital, like you're representing, and really you're representing universal music, which is a whole different thing. So you had to be really careful, like how you present, what you say, and I can speak really directly and honestly to the church, from this role.
Yeah.
And it's encouraged. It's not, I don't feel like there's a limitation on that.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. When I heard that you were going to work with Jesus Culture, I was like really excited for you. And I know we like lost touch for a season and stuff, but I was still excited for you. Because I've listened to Banning for years. And I memean, he hits me in places that not many people can. So it's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm super pumped.
Yeah. And, we never know kind of like, I think sometimes what we're getting into when we step into something.
Right.
100%.
Sure.
I mean, could be for anything. Anytime you start something, you really don't know
Yeah.
100% like what you're getting in, until you actually make the foot and step into the place. And it was that way with this role as well. I got in and, they're in a real transitional season. A lot of their, the worship leaders / artists that they've worked with in the past are all at that age where they're trying to figure out their ministry for the second half of life. And as I got in, there was, a lot of people that were in transition. Kim and Scholar had moved to Montana and felt called to do some things there, on their own. And so we've gotten in and we're sort of in a season of revisioning and rebuilding.
Sure.
And that was kind of unexpected. I didn't expect to do. I knew I'd do some of that, but it's been more than I expected.
Yeah.
But it's also been sweet, because it's like it takes me back to like the youth ministry days of like, okay, like
right.
We've got all of these young leaders, hungry leaders, talented people. Like, how are we going to get them from here to here, and help them achieve, what they want to do, but to be able to really show like because the church is always evolving. Like churches are, as much as we want to do ministry with our friends our entire lives, it just doesn't happen that way a lot of times.
God moves people.
They do. God moves people in different seasons.
Yeah.
And so the church is constantly like reinventing and reemerging.
Right.
Yep.
And that's where we find ourselves a little bit right now. It's like we get the opportunity to be like, okay, we've been through this incredible season of all of this like crazy wild success.
Right.
And now like, let's think ahead, like the next 10 years, like where do we want to be and what are we passionate about?
Right.
What's our convictions?
Right.
And let's go back and build on that.
Yep.
And so that piece of it has been really refreshing and energizing for me.
Yeah.
So I haven't looked at like if there's a leader that's moved out or they're doing something else, it's I don't look at that as like, it's crushing,
loss.
Yeah. It's like, okay, the person has moved out, all of a sudden there's a space there for some things to move into.
It's an opportunity.
And that's exciting.
Yeah.
And so finding ourselves in kind of that season has been really cool.
Cool.
It's fun to see your optimism, towards ministry since you've been part of the church for so long. You walked away from the church for a little bit, they came back, but you've been basically leading within the church for, since out of college, right out of college or whatever. And you're still like, I get excited because the church is continuing to change. Like, I like that. And I feel like I hear more from people that are your age that are like, can we just calm down? Like, I'm tired. I'm tired of the change, and I would like I'd like to do ministry with my friends or whatever.
Yeah.
And almost allow like either step back or allow cynicism to step in or kind of give them goggles to look through, like a lens or whatever. But it's just very encouraging that you're like, more, Lord, like, what are you doing? I want to lean into what I see you're doing, and I want to be part of that. Yeah, it's just, it's not common, honestly.
And navigating change is hard for everybody.
Yeah. Right.
And especially when you find, you settle into that season where like, this is awesome. I don't want this to ever change.
Yep.
Oh,
whether it's with your kids or whether it's with, this friend group that you have or with this ministry or this job situation. We want to settle into those things and we just want to hang on to it with all our strength because this is so good. And that's not the way life happens. It's not the way God moves for whatever reason. He's always shifting and changing things. Yeah. But if you can get to the point where, you can embrace the change and look at the opportunity and the excitement in it,
Yeah.
then it takes on a different, it's not a loss at that point. It's actually like, wow,
Yeah.
if this hadn't happened, I would have never had this opportunity or
100%.
met this person,
Yep.
Right.
or had this relationship.
Right.
And so if you look at it from that viewpoint, it's exciting. Even when you can't see exactly how it's going to shake out, you're like,
Yeah.
this is cool. Like, I don't know what's going to happen now.
Yeah.
But then when the Lord does move in that like massive way, you're like, you've been doing this for years. You've been building this for years, and I just didn't see it until now. Like, I feel like Jesus culture fits who you are so well because it is both the local church and the global church.
100%.
Like, you've always had a hand in both. You've always been drawn to, like, when Promise Keepers or Worship Together. Like, you were seeing the global church. That's what made you come alive. And yet you thrive being the music director on a Sunday morning.
Right.
Not leading worship necessarily, but leading the worship leaders to make the worship experience, like stewarding the presence of the Lord. You love both. And that's what you get to do for your job now.
Yeah.
It's so cool to see that. So,
And you felt like, because, Worship Together was a global ministry. And so, we had people we worked with in the UK and
Yeah.
different places, and we could see, everybody who was visiting, that came to the website and all
Sure.
the Philippines, all these places around the world, and you got to see the impact of songs in all these areas.
Wow.
And, coming on with the church, it could have looked like, it's like, wow, I'm letting some of like the global influence kind of go. The amazing thing is that is it never went away. It just looks different,
Yeah.
It's like now, actually, I can look at it from a church standpoint and
now
like partnership, looking at what happened in the UK. I got a message from a friend in the UK this week. It's like, they've got a thriving church over there right now. And it's just really cool stuff. He's like, hey, would you guys want to do something together?
Wow.
Jesus culture? And I'm like,
100%.
and it's cool. And the cool thing is that it's coming from a church relationship
Sure.
standpoint and community versus it just being a business arrangement or
Yeah.
things like that. So it's really sweet to still be able to. God is so good that way, right? It's like you think you're going to give up something, but you can't ever give God, and like he always brings something back around that's sweeter than what you felt like you were going to lose in the end. And that's been my experience in this whole transition. It's like felt like some things that I would lose or I'd let go of, but it's like it wasn't the case. Like God actually brought something that I wasn't expecting that made the whole thing. It's like, oh, thank you, Lord, you're so good.
Yeah. Wow, man.
Awesome.
Well, thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
Thank you for hanging out with
Yeah.
us and being in the black box. So
I feel like I have so many more questions, Joe. I'm like, okay, what's your take on the church right now? Let's go ahead,
Yeah, that
let's
needs
talk
to
for
be-
another 2 or 3
that's
hours.
a part
Two.
two.
I would
'Cause
love
there's
to
a
hear
lot
your.
happening right now in the church,
And you're seeing. I feel like your vantage point is so unique, because
you get to see what a lot of people don't get to see.
Yeah,
There's
right.
a lot happening in the church, and this maybe is a prime the pump for episode 2.
Yeah.
There's a lot happening in the church, and there's a lot happening in the industry that
Yeah.
resources the church.
Yeah.
And there may not have ever been a time where those things were more disconnected. Like,
Gosh, that's good.
and so
Yeah.
the next time we get together to talk, we should talk about that.
Would love
because,
that.
Because
love
the
that.
church is in a unique season.
Yes.
The industry is in a unique season.
Yes.
But right now, they're.
Yes.
I think they're not on the same page.
Well, and it's funny
Yeah.
because I think for our business, we work in both. We work with those who are in the industry, artists that are traveling and
Yep.
doing tours, and we also work with the local church that they've got their VBS, they've got their youth camp, they've got, men's retreat or whatever.
Right.
And so we're getting to see, and I do feel what you're saying, like more of a disconnect more than ever. And I think for a time it was like, oh, we're kind of all moving in the same direction.
Yes.
But, but anyway, yeah, okay. Part 2?
We'll have
Part
a part
two.
two.
Part 2,
Yeah.
baby? I'm
Stay
down.
tuned.
All right. Well, thank you, Jimmy. I
Yeah.
appreciate
guys.
Thank you so much.
Love you both.
Yeah, me too.